You only need to know me. I will be the one.
What if I were to tell you there are several Zoro fights that hint at the new power he will unlock in his fight against King the Wildfire, and the notion of a sword that understands your will, that reflects the weight of the swordsman's soul, becoming one with the swordsman that holds that sword in hand, is important to discovering the secret of a black blade. Watch till the end to find out why, and maybe even have your mind blown by the genius that is Ichiro Oda. But until then, like the video, subscribe, and let's get into it. So this will be the final video I make about Zoro's new power or new sword for quite some time. You can check out my other Zoro videos to hear my other thoughts if you want. But what I really want to focus on is how every Straw Hat, for the most part, seems to be awakening a new power. Most recently, Sanji with his bloodline or lineage factors. Luffy with what some call Advanced Conquerors, and I'm sure there are other new abilities around the corner. So Zoro should awaken too, shouldn't he? For one, I'd say we already saw a glimpse of his awakening on the rooftop against Kaido. Zoro, like Luffy, tapping into or perhaps already possessing on a subconscious level Conquerors, or Advanced Conquerors Haki, what I call Conquerors Flow, flowing Conquerors to his blades to scar Kaido as Odin had done before him. And this achievement, the flowing of Conquerors of willpower, will be important for the theory presented later, so remember it. But scarring Kaido is significant because of Kaido's unnatural defense, his tough dragon scales, and maybe the will that protects him from succumbing to most damage. Kaido also being able to coat his own body in Conqueror's Haki. These attributes seem to be shared by King to some degree. In that sense, we have further evidence of right hands mirroring their captains in some ways. Shanks and Ben Beckman said by Oda to be the sun and moon in relationship to one another, similar to Roger and Rayleigh, the Dark King, the shadow of the pirate King Roger. Some believe Rayleigh and Beckman to be comparable in strength to their captains, although that's debatable. Clearly Luffy and Kaido are a level above their right hands, Zoro and King, but similar to Zoro, King is one of the wings that has allowed his captain to fly, to reach the heights, the status of an emperor that he lays claim to today. Perhaps King and Kaido even share a backstory that explains how they came to be so strong, the dream or will that drives them, why he, like Zoro, wants his captain to become Pirate King.
Kudarani. Luffy は海賊王になる男だ。知らねえよ。今までもこれからも永久にだ。この国を滅ぼすのは俺だ。この国は俺のもんだ。
And so if King is comparable to Kaido in some ways, how has Oda shown us this or told us this thus far in the story? Well, King's Vivre card describes him as the All-Star, who dances in the sky shining in his flame. He is the first commander, a trusted subordinate whose strength in the crew is only second to Kaido's. Some time before joining the Beast Pirates, King is said to have marveled at Kaido's strength, perhaps the likes of which he had not borne witness to before. The presence and ability of a thing said to be the world's strongest creature and pirate. Akin to Blackbeard and Shiryu maybe. Some have even suggested King may have echoed the same words, that he, King, had been waiting for a man like him, a man like Kaido. Similarly, we know that Zoro has certain expectations of Luffy, that his own captain must be as strong as or stronger than him. So again, the comparisons we can make to Kaido, King the Wildfire as of chapter 1032 is still giving Zoro a run for his money, pushing him to limits we have not seen in quite some time. The inability to injure King is akin to the struggle Zoro faced early on when fighting Mr. One, who said ever since he ate his devil fruit, no sword can harm him, echoing what we're seeing now with King, who has sustained little to no injuries thus far. But what's really important from the chapter as it pertains to this video is everything else that happens after this. Zoro uses his three-sword style, Great Dragon Twister attack, which seems to be similar to a move that he used against Kaido in the past. Looking back at Kaido in chapter 1003, some have pointed out that Kaido took some minor damage from Zoro after being hit by this move or a similar move. We see some blood and Kaido screaming or grunting slightly in pain, however shallow the cut might have been. After this attack, bystanders such as Killer and even Big Mom are shown expressing surprise that Zoro had managed to cut Kaido. So going back to the recent chapter of 1032, Zoro is unable to cut King while using the same or at least a similar move. What does this say about those two clashes? Is King suddenly stronger than Kaido? No, that's crazy talk. Is it possible King has a better defense than Kaido? That'd be surprising as well given the lore behind Kaido's durability and all the hype surrounding his inability to die or be killed, that is. And so with King, it's fair to say he is comparable to Kaido's defense at least. Again, the sun and the moon. We see King block Zoro's attack with his wings, and Zoro maybe draws the same connection we just did to Kaido by saying in response to King's defense that dinosaurs are basically like dragons, big lizards with tough hides. And King responds by saying Zoro's assessment is not wrong, but in King's specific case, it goes even beyond that. That he, King, is on another level. Zoro then, continuing his assessment of King, questions why King hasn't suffered a single injury. After all, Zoro's attacks, the only damage King has incurred has been to his armor, to his mask, not to himself it seems. His body remains unscathed. Not a single drop of blood is to be found. After this, Zoro begins to doubt himself, whether he can win, and hints at victory being impossible unless he can figure out what King is and how to bypass his defenses. What King is exactly, his ancient race maybe, and his abnormal defenses are implied to be tied together, not just King's devil fruit but his bloodline. Otherwise, Zoro wouldn't feel the need to mention it, would he? Fishmen and giants are stronger than regular humans like Zoro after all, and so the Lunarians should be as well. But this notion of King being abnormal is no different than how Big Mom describes Kaido as a thing that can't be beaten. A thing, an Oni, ogre, or ancient giant with inhuman strength and durability due to his own race. How do you defeat an opponent like this? And has Zoro done so before? The answer is yes, he has. A few Zoro fights that might all come into play with King and the awakening of Zoro's new power are as follows: Kaido, Pika, the dragon on Punk Hazard, Ryuma, Mr. One, and Dracule Mihawk. Allow me to explain. With Pika, I'm sure you remember the highlight of that fight. Zoro recalls his training with Mihawk, how any sword can become a black blade, but there is new evidence that this is different than becoming a sword god. After flowing Haki to his swords, creating a pseudo-black blade you could say, after cutting the mountain of Pika in half by willing his blades to cut through stone of that size, Zoro smiles at how his blades show no trace of a scratch, and reflects on the words of Mihawk. Has your sword ever broken? To which Zoro responds yes, more times than he can count. Think back to Eni's lobby and Zoro's sword rusting, or better yet Mihawk and the shattering of Zoro's two blades. Mihawk tells Zoro if he had been clad in Haki, those same blades wouldn't have broken. Although I take some issue with this and believe again that Haki is will or spirit manifest coating your swords. And so if your will fails you, there might be a way to shatter even a blade clad in Haki. This is further implied from Pika coating his entire body in Haki, becoming a human black blade, you could argue. And Zoro telling Pika that the fight will be determined by whose Haki is greater, whose will then is stronger. But Mihawk says to consider every nick on your blade a blemish on your pride, a mark of shame. Any sword can become a black blade like mine. This I believe is Zoro's soon-to-be power-up, and there's more evidence to support this. But the concept of human black blades might be key to whatever is going on with King, Kaido, and others. I'd throw Luffy in there too, that unlike arm and Haki, Conquerors is indicative of an unyielding will, and a sword or body coated in Conquerors, perhaps permanently, will never break, or at the very least, will not sustain damage easily. Conqueror's coating being a level beyond arm and Haki, a black blade being a level above a sword temporarily clad in Haki even. Then again, we don't know if Mihawk himself has Conquerors, so this wouldn't necessarily make sense. So it could either be Advanced Conquerors or just Advanced Arm and Haki. It would make sense since he's Shank's rival and Zoro's goal. If Mihawk doesn't have Conquerors, a black blade must rely on Arm and Haki alone, a level we have not yet seen, that Zoro has yet to attain, a level of armament that King possibly has. Against Kaido, Zoro coats his swords with Conqueror's Haki to scar him, an advanced technique he performs subconsciously. Kaido tells us this is a rare ability that only some can use, a level of coding that surpasses your basic armament Haki or Ryo. One could argue this goes beyond prior notions of advanced armament, or maybe Conquerors can be combined with the other Haki types, as others in the community have suggested. I'm reminded of Katakuri and how he told Luffy that there are levels to not just observation Haki but armament Haki as well. In Katakuri's case, he had achieved the highest known level of observation Haki, Future Sight. Wouldn't it be a nice parallel if King, on the other hand, had pushed his armament or Conqueror's Haki to a similar advanced state like Future Sight? But unlike Katakuri, King, like Kaido, can code himself in his attacks in Conquerors, or maybe just advanced armament. If Zoro can do this with his blades, is it far-fetched to think King can as well, but with his body? If Luffy and Zoro are conquerors, why not King and Kaido? What does King mean when he says it's more than just his devil fruit or that he was on another level? Words that echo Katakuri's own. And where does this discussion of advanced armament or conqueror's haki lead us? To a black blade. The formation of a pact. The permanent fusion or union of souls. The culmination of shared or collective will. First, and as I mentioned earlier, King blocks Zoro's attack with his wings, and Zoro says dinosaurs are basically like dragons. Big lizards with tough hides. People have long thought Zoro would recreate the legend of Ryuma who killed a dragon over the skies of Wano, which is where we currently are as Onigashima hovers overhead. But perhaps the dragon Oda has in mind is King, whose defense has now been compared to one, who ate an ancient Zoan dragon-type devil fruit. Zoro, as his clash begins with King, threatened to tear out or cut King's throat, which could possibly and coincidentally result in King's head being cut off as seen in various dragon-slaying depictions, from Zoro cutting the dragon on Punk Hazard to the scene of Ryuma cutting a dragon as told by Gyukimaru, and then the one-shot series Monsters by Ichiro Oda where Ryuma slays a dragon in the sky. Now, something interesting that is said by the samurai that observed Zoro's fight with King early on is how Zoro reminds them of two Shimatsuki swordsmen of legend, the great master swordsman and former daimyo of Ringo when he was young, Shimatsuki Ushimaru, as well as Ushimaru's ancestor, the god of the blade Shimatsuki Ryuma. Most importantly, however, is the mention of fate, and so too the concept of inherited will, and the fact that Ryuma was also a one-eyed samurai. The suggestion here is Oda will use the plot lines with Zoro and King to show us in real time who Ryuma was via Zoro, just how strong Ryuma was and Zoro now is, and just how much stronger Zoro could be, and whatever secret lies behind Zoro's closed eye, which has for whatever reason received practically no attention in the story up until this very moment. It could either be a suppressed power or a symbolic scar that has no latent abilities whatsoever. But you'd think Zoro missing an eye would be the subject of much more conversation from his crewmates, but they seem to have just moved on from it, or disregarded it, and from a writing perspective intentionally so. It's worth mentioning that just as his fight with Queen was heating up, Zoro commented on Sanji's eyebrow in a way that suggested something was changing, and lo and behold, Sanji's eyebrow changed and he awakened a new power later on. We see similarly in the exact same chapter, Karamatsu or Hyogoro mentions Zoro having one eye like Ryuma. Coincidence? Maybe. I just stressed that Rayleigh's eye is open despite having the same scar, whereas Zoro and Ryuma have closed eyes. Shanks has a scar over his eye, but it remains open as well. So what is Oda doing or saying here? What is he implying? But speaking of Ryuma, after Zoro fought him and obtained Shusui, the black blade that Ryuma either obtained after slaying a dragon or prior to doing so, maybe Ryuma needed a black blade in order to cut down the dragon, the hardness of a black blade being strong enough to pierce the scales of said dragon. But after defeating Ryuma, Zoro comes to wield Shusui and is amazed by how different it is compared to your regular sword. Notice also that Zoro used this blade Shusui to cut off the head of the dragon on Punk Hazard, a call back to Ryuma from Monsters, yes, but also maybe Oda is hinting that while Zoro was able to scar Kaido and eventually King as well maybe, he might need a black blade to finish the job, to not just scar but sever heads, or sever bodies in two, to cut even deeper than he currently can. In fact, the way Zoro describes Shusui has parallels to Enma. Enma is shown to be difficult to control, very demanding and exerting strain on the user. It packs a punch and releases a lot of ryu or haki. The case with Shusui is somewhat similar. In chapter 473, when Zoro uses the sword against Oars who can be compared to Kaido in terms of having an abnormal and very durable body, Zoro says Shusui won't bend or break even if a dinosaur steps on it. Hardness is one of the special characteristics of a black blade. In chapter 474, Zoro mentions Shusui being heavier than his other swords, and I mentioned in the video titled Zoro's New Sword After Defeating King and Surpassing an Old Legend from the Past, that you can watch by looking at the link on the screen, that the weight of a sword is another word for will, and so spirit and so soul. The strength of the blade, or at least of a master swordsman, is tied directly to his or her will. Not just skill, but willpower is what decides the outcome, and it is one of the reasons Mihawk was so impressed with Zoro after their first fight. Why Zoro's strength was said to be one not often seen in this world, and why Zoro's most important blade, the Wadaichimonji, the sword that carries Kuina's will, did not break even after colliding with Mihawk's black blade Yoru. supposedly the strongest black blade. But like Enma, the weight, the power or strength of the spirit unleashed by the blade Shusui was remarkable. It forces oars to dodge. Oars who, akin to Kaido being told by Big Mom to dodge Zoro's attack on the rooftop, is forced to dodge Zoro's attack on Thriller Bark, Oars saying it would have cut him badly if he had not dodged it. What is it that makes Shusui and other black blades so strong? With Enma, it's the release of spirit, of haki. Are black blades similar? Do black blades contain the entirety of one's soul? The difference between Shusui and Enma is not yet a black blade, but mimics the power of one. It has even been compared to a cursed sword, but in each case all these blades are difficult to control because of the weight of the blade. The spirit within the sword is heavy, hard to hold or handle. Like Shusui, it took some time for Zoro to master Enma, and like Shusui, the power and technique of Enma or his other swords, when they become black blades, should become stronger also. Strong enough to cut even King. But let's go back to something else. Shusui, a black blade that is so hard or strong that it won't break even if a dinosaur steps on it. We see Zoro currently struggling against King, a dinosaur. He's doubting himself, wondering if he'll lose. He needs to find a way to overcome King's defenses, which means he needs a stronger attack, which further means he needs to upgrade his own power or the power of his swords. Is it possible to drive this idea home that Zoro will break another sword, despite his haki training with Mihawk? Despite the deep shame Mihawk said it should bring him, that maybe this shame is necessary now for Zoro to reach that next level. For one, many have made videos on the Nidai Kitetsu and how Zoro will get this sword after Wano. Seems kind of obvious, right? But how exactly will he get it? Well, for one, he'd need to lose the Sandai Kitetsu. One way to lose it is for it to break. A sword breaking being an excellent way to showcase the struggle Zoro is undergoing and the perfect opportunity for him to replace that sword with an upgrade later on. Interesting that Sanji actually and intentionally breaks his raid suit before transitioning to a new power. If the Sandai or another sword breaks, Zoro could push himself to unlock the truth of a black blade for his other two swords. In this case, what I believe to be Enma and the Wado Ichimonji, two swords that coincidentally are said to have a special relationship with one another and are made by the same blacksmith. Now, it's also possible that Nidai Kitetsu is simply given to Zoro when Tenguyama realizes Zoro is the man he has been waiting for, unless he was waiting for someone else. But this could be a reward for what Zoro, Luffy, and the other Straw Hats do on behalf of Wano, for freeing and helping to open Wano's borders. So, how about unlocking a black blade? How will that work exactly beyond everything we've discussed so far? Zoro's struggle and self-doubt has potentially led to the reaction from Enma we saw in chapter 1032. Zoro's declining strength and will is causing Enma to respond negatively maybe. A loss of control that has resulted in Zoro having his haki or Rio drained, akin to what happened prior to Zoro's mastery of the blade's curse-like properties. This seems to be the perfect setup for Zoro to tame the blade again, to push himself beyond his limits, you could say, to permanently flow his will to the blade and conquer it. The flowing of Conqueror's haki, Conqueror's flow, wherein the spirit of the swordsman and the blade become one, forever encasing or sheathing or sharpening a blade with your own willpower, wherein the blade becomes an extension of the swordsman himself, carrying the heavy weight of that swordsman's soul, like Shusui, like Yoru, permanently, even after they've passed on from this world, the legacy of strength left behind. Zoro's struggle is said to be reminiscent of his fight with Mr. One. The exact expression: Zoro hears a sound. Zoro feels the breath of all creation, the breath of trees, of rocks, the very heartbeat of the earth, the very world's soul. He taps into the power to cut anything and nothing at all. Zoro, who commanded his blade to cut steel against Mr. One by flowing his will to it. A blade that came to understand his will, that came to understand him. Zoro, who perhaps did the very same thing against the stone mountain of Pika, the breath of rocks, earth, and stone, whose will also flowed to his blades to cut Kaido. Are these two or three events the same or connected in some way? For a sword to understand your will and to become one with you seems to be the secret of a black blade, obtained over the course of not just many battles, but many near-death experiences. The place between worlds where the living and the dead collide, where souls dance and reunite. And it might be the permanency of this connection that allows you to unlock a black blade, to hear the breath of your own sword, akin to merging with and awakening the soul of a devil fruit, that each is alive in some way. as well as each perhaps containing an inheritance of wills. Even Enma, whose soul reacts to the song of a shamisen being played off in the distance, presumably by Lady Hiyori, the daughter of Kuzuki Oden. It's as if whatever remains of Oden is responding, reaching out from the blade, again awakening, akin to a devil fruit. You can argue that this is only possible because of Zoro's lessened control over Enma, or maybe it's one thing or the other but not both. But again, the blade is alive, and it's possible a black blade is nothing more than a swordsman that has become the blade, and merged himself with the soul that is housed within it, so that the two are not distinct units but one and the same. Conquerors is said to not just be the concept of willpower, but the idea of fighting with your spirit. And so a sword infused with the heavy weight of a person's soul basically takes that soul and turns it into a blade whose durability is reflective of the swordsman's own unyielding will. This is perhaps why there are so few black blades in the story. As far as I can tell, there are only two, Mihawk's and Ryuma's. Zoro maybe will be the third, or fourth and fifth. But fighting with your spirit, cutting others down with your soul, the god of a blade, the spirit that resides in and exudes mastery over a sword. So I decided to go back and add this bit from chapter 1033 into the video, but in chapter 1033, Zoro is continuously struggling to control Enma. It's as if Enma is trying to tell him something, and Zoro up until this point in time has not been listening. Or at the very least, he doesn't understand the language his sword is speaking, the breath of his blade. It is only later on toward the end of the chapter that we get some affirmation that these blades are sort of alive, and have a soul or will of their own, a duty. This we observe from several back-to-back flashbacks from Zoro as he goes after his three falling blades, the Kitetsu, Enma, and the Wado Ichimonji. As Zoro's blades fall, he falls with them, and as he does so, he remembers a conversation he had with Momonosuke about the word Snatchy, which is a test of courage, something people say to be brave, something expressed when giving it your all, throwing away wit and any trace of fear, putting your life on the line. It is clear from the fight so far that this fight with King has put Zoro through a test of courage. The flashback emphasizes again that Zoro has never said the phrase himself. The word Snatchy was just something the old guy in his village told him. This old man being Shimotsuki Kozaburo, the blacksmith Kuina's grandfather, the man who forged two of his blades. It's almost as if Oda might have Zoro yell this word for the first time against King in the near future, calling upon some sort of lineage against King, speaking the language of the blade, the language of courage, of Snatchy, a language that knows no fear, no doubt, only duty. Oda, through the dialogue of Kozaburo and Zoro, tells us that swords have a purpose, mainly as tools for taking lives, created to kill. That is why they are designed. Each sword has its own personality that the swordsman must learn in order to overcome it. In a way, he is saying swords are alive, in their own way. They live lives of bloodshed and honor, having known the hand of many a human, but not many that have been worthy. Kozaburo then scoffs at the notion of curses and cursed blades. A dangerous sword is a cursed sword. Foolishness. Cursed swords are just famed swords that are feared by the weak, those that aren't strong enough to control the blade. That's why people call them cursed. The sword is scary, simply because it's performing its duty for what it was made for. That sword I created when I was young was the masterpiece of my life. It was a sword that was so serious about doing its duty. I gave that famed sword the name of the King of the Underworld. Back to the present, Zoro is lying on the ground with a surprised face. He finally understands everything. The King of the Underworld. That name refers to Enma. And what we see next is a recognition that it takes a king to know a king, and just maybe a conqueror or an advanced conqueror to master the blade, or perhaps an advanced will to turn it black. But in case Mihawk himself is not a conqueror, there's another closely related possibility and explanation. Kozaburo then tells Zoro that famed swords are always watching humans. These blades will choose a swordsman that they see fit to be their master. Think of Harry Potter and the wand chooses the wizard Harry. A callback to what was said in Logtown that a sword chooses its wielder. What if when you come to wield a sword and control it to some degree, it has really chosen you, but it will test you over the course of your journey together to determine if you are actually worthy, and it is only after watching you its human wielder for some time that upon concluding you are able to fulfill the blade's duty, to accept the sword for what it is, that it will in turn accept you. Again, the sword acknowledging you. What if after you pass the blade's test, a new bond is formed, and it is visually portrayed via the blackening of a blade, the formation of a black blade? We see Zoro look at Enma, lying on the ground. Despite not being in his hand, the sword is still active, expelling smoke or spirit or some kind of haki or energy, and Zoro's arm is still affected by the haki absorption of Enma. Given this panel, it appears as if over time you become the blade. A part of you forever remains within the sword, even when it's no longer attached to you. And so this permanency of haki, of presence or spirit, is characteristic over time of a black blade, a product of the test, the countless battles Ryuma, Mihawk, and even Zoro now have endured. A test of courage, Snatchy, a test of will. Zoro says, "So the time has finally come. The sword has chosen me, and is testing me." Standing before King again, he says, "It's true that a sword does not have any ill will by nature. There is no malice. That means it's my power that is still not enough. I'm too weak. Maybe Odin could fight with ease, even with this much haki being drained out of him. Am I right, Enma?" Odin, despite having not lived long enough or fought nearly enough battles to turn Enma black, had been worthy of you, the most worthy thus far. The old theory I had that conquerors or a strong will was required to create a black blade is hinted at in chapter 1033 as we see some beast pirates approach the area to help King. Zoro then questions if he should stabilize his haki because if he gives in and allows it to be unleashed, it could end up taking his life. But suddenly as he changes his mind, the beast pirates start foaming from their mouths and fall down, hinting at Conqueror's haki having replaced Zoro's usual arm and haki coating as Zoro actively uses the ability. The aura emanating from him is everywhere in the air, like a kind of spiritual pressure. Zoro then says no, this is good the way it is, giving Enma and his other blades what they demand, adhering to the meaning of the word Snatchy, risking it all, betting his life once again as he's done so many times in the past. We then see Zoro standing before King, his 3 swords covered with black lightning and smoke. King says, "I see. So you also have kingly ambitions. Do you also intend to become a king?" And Zoro remembers the words Luffy said to him when Zoro agreed to join Luffy's crew back in East Blue. Luffy vowing to become the king of the pirates and needing the world's greatest swordsman by his side. Zoro answers King's question with a smile on his face and a challenging gaze. As his 3 blades roar to life, Zoro tells King that yes, his path is similar to that of a king's because he made a promise to his captain and his best friend. But we discussed whether King has conquerors, and now it's worth asking whether he has advanced conquerors too, because he doesn't flinch away from Zoro's new power, something Zoro can manifest now at will. Rather, King recognizes the ability and so maybe he can also use it. His name being King after all. Him as a playing card occupying the space of a king in Kaido's deck, you could say. The notion of cursed swords, the duty of famed blades, a recognition of their true nature led me to consider this part of Zoro's backstory and compare it to Frankie. Tom told him the following about ships, weapons, and inventions in general being considered at times as evil and being denied their nature. You mustn't deny that which you've created. Its only parent must give it love, even if it could bring ruin to the world. Even if the ship you've made could hurt somebody. The ship isn't to blame. When a man's made a ship, he makes it a part of himself, with a dawn. And so making it a part of yourself, making the sword a part of yourself. And so for Zoro, when you acknowledge the blade will acknowledge you. You mustn't be ashamed of its nature, of its duty. When you become worthy of the blade, when you allow it to perform its duty, perhaps your will replaces whatever once resided within the sword. The blackness of a blade then reflects a new reality that has become yours, that you are now its master, its god, the god of the blade. Finally, just as any sword can become a black blade, any sword can become a fire sword. Zoro can now cut fire, but we haven't seen Zoro summon fire from his blade yet, and that's always a future possibility. And because some of you have already heard that information and seen my other Zoro vs. King video, I just wanted to mention something new that was brought to my attention by a subscriber for this remix, you could call it. The name Enma. Enma is the king or god of hell in Japanese Buddhist myth, said to be the judge of dead souls. which is perfect because the topic of Black Blades is heavily linked to the soul, and Enma itself is tied to the soul of Kazuki Odin, who promised his soul would live on. Just as Kaido faced the specter of Odin against Enma, so might Orochi as of the making of this video against Hiyori, if she carries with her the Ami no Habakuri. I would add that Ryuma is said to have possessed a great warrior's soul in Oda's series Monsters, and this great warrior's soul is perhaps indicative of a black blade. Moreover, Enma is a sword said by Tenguyama to be able to cut through to the bottom of hell, maybe through the fires of hell, and so hearing and feeling the breath of fire to cut King's flames, whereas a black blade or Advanced Conquerors can pierce King's dragon or dinosaur skin. But if all Zoro does have to do is figure out what King is, maybe Oda is implying the breath of all things, or whatever technique Zoro uses to cut anything and nothing relies upon knowing your enemy, which ties into Mihawk and clairvoyance, his epithet or nickname of Hawk Eyes, seeing through any technique in defense. If you know your opponent is steel or stone or even diamond, you can cut him. Wind, water, or fire, whatever the element, you can cut them. Do Mihawk's eyes have anything to do with this? Or is it just for show? Is Mihawk so strong because, like Zoro, he can will his blade to cut whatever he wants? That, as Zoro so often says, there is nothing in this world he cannot cut. He just has to figure out what it is. What I do know is, King is said to have come from a land of gods or God's land. Wouldn't it be fitting for Zoro to become a sword god against King, unlocking a black blade pitting God against God? But as I've said before, Zoro doesn't fear God, certainly not a lesser god. Not even the god of death can stand in his way, in the way of his dream. The strain being placed on Zoro is intentional. It's Oda returning Zoro to a state he is all too familiar with, one that is near death. All of these close calls he's had throughout the story, this is but another. Death, dying is like brushing your teeth for Zoro. He does it all the time. It isn't new. Neither is despair and doubt, feelings he felt in his prior fights, against Mr. One, against Mihawk, against so many others. The sense that his dream was once again slipping away. I expand on this concept of dreams in the other Zoro vs. King video, and I discuss it from the perspective of King and the dreams that he has as well as shares with his captain, akin to Zoro supporting Luffy. Like I said earlier, the wings of kings, right hands. When it comes to Sanji vs. Queen, I'm not really that invested in Queen, to be honest, as much as I am with Sanji's own transformation. And the story his awakening tells gives me a lot of hope that similarly, all of Zoro's own narratives and unanswered questions from prior arcs will be resolved to some degree. His left eye being compared to Ryuma, each a one-eyed swordsman. The secret of black blades built up to this moment here in Wano. Zoro's first black blade Shusui having been earned after a battle against a samurai from this country, but not through his own achievement. Shusui leading us in a way to the land of Wano, where Zoro through his conversation with Gyukimaru seems to have finally understood what black blades really are. A question that lingers over the current battle, and one that I think will be answered soon. But as usual, we will have to wait and see. Don't forget to like the video, comment with your thoughts below, share this with your friends, and subscribe. Also click that notification bell. As always, there is more to come. Until next time, I'll see you all in Valhalla.
未熟無情
挑戦世界三条結んで
美しく
三刀流奥義
いいね世界一の剣豪
切れぬものなし
何を背負う強さの果てに何を望む弱き者よ
バカなことがあるか 十分だ。ロロナはゾロ。てめえもだ。あのガキどもの繊維の1本や2本へし折るのに、これが最高の一撃だ。託したら死ぬ。世界一か。しかし三刀流奥義三冠世界。貴様が死ぬにはまだ早い。のんきに待っている必要はない。我が名はデュラキュール・ミホーク。己を知り世界を知り強くなれ。同じ。俺はこの先生きとし生きてもこの最強の大で貴様を待つ。この剣を越えてみよう。この俺を越えてみよう。ロロノア殿。